Welcome back to my channel Celebuzz. Please share and subscribe and press the bell icon for new updates. Do you think it's real? Frank Fritz is the adored American Pickers star, breathed his last on September 30th, 2024. When I'll be 60 years old, the nation was shocked to hear of a legendary figure in television history. However, it wasn't limited to an anticipated demise following difficulties after suffering a heart attack or stroke devastated those closest to him. His estate was worth $6 million in the background that set off a conflagration of mystique and debate. Hello Frank spent his entire life searching for long-lost relics found in long-forgotten barns rose to prominence as wealth and power, each shrouded in secrecy, possessing an iron will that concealed frightening truths. Quickly, word spread that he had departed, the bulk of his wealth to a supposedly his secret, a child of 10 years old father, and his long-term partner, Danielle Colby, performs with on American Pickers. The unveiling of this unidentified infant stunned, too, his loved ones and admirers. The man known as Frank was shaving a kid with Danielle? What the fuck? Is it feasible? An immediate family member broke down in tears. My last wishes, purportedly written under wraps following his 2022 stroke. Midwest One Bank appointment as the head of the department, although not all of remain unknown, leading to conjecture regarding the real purpose of Frank. During sickness while his star was on the decline, Frank reignited his association with Mike Wolfe, his most outstanding buddy from back in the day, following a long period of disagreements over ego and finances. They walked hand in hand throughout his last moments. But was peacemaking sufficiently to alleviate is the storm going to burst? Frank's tragic tale is more than that. The mystique surrounding money is captivating. Closeness, familial mysteries, and hidden truths clash head-on, assuaging everyone's fears and unwilling to avert my gaze. Do not hesitate to share your ideas on this page, and please remember tis a means to activate, subscribe, and like, notifies you so you can stay up-to-date riveting tales that stir the emotions. Hello, Frank Fritz was a shining star in more ways than one. Pickers, Americans. It wasn't his journey, approximately an obsession with vintage items, but a tragic battle rife with suffering. It was nothing new for him to suffering. Long before he passed away, Frank, against the condition of Crohn's, a persistent suffers from an inflammatory bowel disease, slowly sapped his strength. He was left with after his 2019 back surgery, ongoing discomfort and reliant on narcotics to meet basic needs. And that was just the beginning. Show up. In 2022, while having a regular checkup, medical professionals found that Frank had his diagnosis of lung cancer sent him whirling about. I was astounded. I've lived my entire life trudging across dusty rural roads. I never expected my lungs to fail me. Please don't treat me like this, he told his dear buddy Jerry. Regardless of the fact that during the early stages of cancer, it placed Frank was under tremendous mental strain. Death, along with concerns about business that needs completing, and consider ruptured partnerships. Such amount, along with a difficult addiction and way of life, caused a terrifying stroke in July of 2022 while he was at home in the state of Iowa. A limb was affected by the stroke, body crippled and caused serious brain damage harm, rendering Frank speechless or tend to his own needs. They hurried him to the critically ill patient in a hospital, and from that point on, his life was all about hospital beds and other medical devices. But there was more sorrow to come. Frank had a stroke, cancer, and been diagnosed with narrowing of the aorta, illness that limits the circulation all the way to the core. Professionals in the medical field stated that upon top of his stroke, and a time bomb was Crohn's illness. As much as $30,000 was spent on his medical treatment, each providing round-the-clock in-home nursing services, rehabilitation, and dedicated management of his cancer treatment and cardiac disorder. The charming man, her rural house in Iowa, brimming with classic bikes and old relics, waste turned into a small medical facility, loaded down with wheelchairs and machines. The stress of being sick, being alone, and devastated connections drove Frank to deep despair. On a sunny afternoon in September, as he sat in his living room in the year 2024, again, Frank's stroke came on abruptly. At this point, he was hopelessly lost. It fell, and died on the spot, leaving beyond a priceless hole in the loved ones' and admirers' hearts. The work of Frank's unanticipated demise signified more than the conclusion of a life. At that moment, a tempest of a dispute over his estate and final testament. Just before he died, around $6 was left behind by Frank Fritz. $1 million. A staggering sum for someone who began their professional exploring dilapidated barns for old things. One of his assets was an vast assortment of antiques used for vintage, motorbikes and corroded gateways to distinctive America valuables stashed in huge warehouses in the state of Iowa. Along with Frank Fritz, he possessed an elegant Savannah, Illinois boutique that annually attracted a large number of admirers. Frank also had a home in Leavenworth at $392,000 in 2024, in addition to a nearby parcel of land with a value of substantial amount. However, the shocking part was not worth his time or energy to the country real estate. It was the enigmatic Frank Ho left behind. October is the date on the will, 23rd day of 2023, when Frank's health has drastically worsened after the one he hit first. Previously known as Midwest One Bank, chosen to oversee the financial affairs of Frank when he was no longer able to, he was likewise named the head of the estate, but nevertheless retained the bequest's contents undercloaks, exposed to a select few of reliable folks following Frank's demise and the unveiling of the hidden truths revealed. They set off a media frenzy seismic event. Leaked sources state that the majority of Frank's assets was bequeathed to Anam benefactor, a minor suspected of being his hidden offspring with Danielle Colby, who co-starred in American Picker. The baby's presence was a shocking revelation that took everyone by surprise, in those closest to him, including his fans and family. Little did anyone know about a passionate connection between Danielle and Frank. The general public had believed they were only nearby team members. We always considered them to be merely labor, my friends. I don't understand how a youngster and who was ever informed. Harry's extended, I can't believe it, grumbled Jerry. My name is Danielle, chose not to address the rumors, but by remaining silent she amplified the public's suspicions. Solely 70% off lands owned by Frank, which include Frank Fritz's discovers, as well as his antique assortment, would the child's behalf be put into a trust on subject to the fact that the kid has been validated by genetic testing. The several were to receive the remaining amount. Family and friends. Out of the blue, longtime buddy of Frank's, Mike Wolf, was completely omitted from the will. This controversy ensued due to its exclusion. Some thought Frank deliberately not included Mike because of previous conflicts. To others it appeared to be a calculated move to shield his wealth from any litigation-complicated webs. A new phenomenon, likely romantic offspring, and the material included in. Because of the bequest, Frank's family was thrust into a fierce court fight. Those close to him, cousins among them, took legal action by suing contesting the bequest, contending that Frank exhibited a lack of mental capacity during composed because of issues stemming from illnesses such as cancer and stroke. And they wanted the will not stand, and the estate fall under the purview of conventional inheritance laws. At the same time, a committed crew of supporters of Frank started a movement on the internet must safeguard his reputation, particularly high-used items, assortment from those who allege they cared solely about money. Conflict in the courtroom escalated into a popular in the media. Proceedings in court were live-streamed, and startling discoveries regarding the personal life of Frank, his diseases, addictions, and interred personal details about the family were made public. I can see. The public breakdown of his family began, with family battling it out in the printer. Frank would be devastated if you were to look at us like this, a cousin sobbed, admitted. The storm, however, persisted. That's the place. Shortly after, it engulfed Mike Wolf and falling American Danielle Colby, leading Pickers into a catastrophic situation. On the center stage of American Pickers, the Mike Wolf and Fritz were once thought to be the ideal pair. Lifelong companions class, united by shared experiences of growing up without a parent, as well as an intense love for vintage merchandise. As a pair, they voyaged across the United States, exploring dingy barns for the purpose of secret riches, transforming oblivion artifacts into representations of America culture. But notoriety and wealth, like a jagged knife, finally severed their friendship that appears to be unbreakable, thrusting them into a vicious cycle of confrontation, coupled with treachery, replete with catastrophic occult details that were revealed. Just after Frank breathed his last on September 30th, the year 2024. Conflict between Frank and Mike, by the year 2021, detonated violently. Given a harsh interview with the newspaper The Sun, Frank freely attacked Mike, blaming him for working as a solo artist on American Pickers Perform, so putting him in the background. Character. It's similar to Aerosmith with Tyler Steven, and I'm merely the man on playing guitar behind him, Frank shouted, furious, his voice brimming with frustration. Not only that, though. A confidential informant disclosed that Frank had found unauthorized financial transactions within sponsorship agreements for the show. Few thousand dollars were directed towards. Frank had a hard time covering for Mike's enormous insurance claims because from his colitis, in addition to the year 2022 heart attack, Frank was deeply hurt. According to him, their friendship was utilized by Mike for personal, the insider murmured, as if unveiling a shocking revelation. The suspicion that pierced Frank's heart, causing him to loyal companion into an enraged adversary. Stroke that struck Frank in 2022, leaving one side all over his body crippled and in his verbal expression, appeared to be the last piece of evidence that their relationship. Then again in the stillness of a medical facility, Mike made an appearance, while sobbing onto Frank's palm, he falling from his brow. "There is no one like you, Frank. Stay with me, Mike," softly murmured, his voice strained with feeling, shattering the tranquility of the room. Experiencing a moment of reconciliation. Relatives, from yesteryear renewing ties following a long period of animosity. Weak and hardly able to communicate, Frank was able to put on an angry face while smiling, no longer existed. Still, a more sinister reality remained yet to arrive. Upon the disclosure of Frank's will, the world was shocked as he passed away. Like his pal Mike Wolf, who was in charge of Hishi's dying breath, he had nothing left but the $6 million bequest, had no effect. The enigmatic will instead bestowed the bulk of Frank's fortune to supposedly his 10-year-old co-star on American Picker, and his secret son Colleen Danielle. It was as if the revelation an avalanche, jolting Frank's loved ones and deeply devoted fan base. Fritz lived an independent life, free from partnership, although his chest pounded in his feelings for Diane, the lady he loves very forever cherished. Before, they hoped for a future together. However, in the year 2021, their romance came to a tragic end. After Diane departed, Frank felt devastated by the betrayal he felt. To put it simply, she was my heart's desire. But at times, love alone isn't sufficient. "Hello," Frank shared with Chris Davis, his closest buddy when he was at his most lonely. Their split felt more than that. The news hit the already delicate soul of Frank, leading him further into an addiction trap and disease. During Frank's latter years, when Chris Davis's health deteriorated quickly, emerged as his most reliable support system. A longtime acquaintance, Chris, was nominated by the custodian of Frank's estate, the court stroke that occurred in 2022. Concerned about Frank with extraordinary commitment, from visiting a physical therapist with him scheduling time to sit peacefully next to his in a hospital bed, as I listened to the tremulous hushed murmurs of a man whose time is over. Unfortunately, Frank wasn't the powerful man I formerly knew. He was feeble. Notwithstanding this, every time he had a conversation regarding classic bikes, Chris taught back, feeling a lump in his throat. In those instances, proof of a bond that will last a lifetime, in addition to serving as a tragic reminder of how life is incredibly delicate. Even though it is seldom reported on by news outlets, Frank Fritz's family had a multifaceted impact on history. Being childless and unmarried, some cousins were left behind by Frank and their extended families. Upon his departure far away, sadness gave way to anxiety above the $6 million real estate. Tensions continued to rise even while during the funeral, with inquiries circulating, whose hand would be given his cherished antique assortment, the shop at Frank Fritz finds, and Iowa, where he resides. An option among. In a fit of rage, Frank's cousins formally charged Chris with abusing his position in the role of protector to influence Frank's assets. "Frank ought to have entrusted his members of our family, rather than acquaintances with whom we have deep but superficial ties, understand," she yelled out to the passers-by, sorrowful individuals enveloping the ceremony. The stress broke what family's lack of cohesion and its signals, the beginning of a soon-to-be-started legal conflict, a shocking one for fans, and deeply saddened. Frank didn't merely overcome adversity, he confronted an adversary, dependency. Upon a subsequent failure procedures in 2019, persistent discomfort. Frank ensnared by opioids. The tablets were initially a crucial support system, enabling him to persevere through rigorous days where American Pickers is filmed. However, once his reliance on them became so great that he couldn't do without. "For my needs to be met in order to feel at ease," Frank once confessed to Mike Wolf amid an unusual juncture of honesty. However, that reliance gradually decimated his physical and financial resources, and his value oneself. Notwithstanding the fact that they have difficulties regarding on air, Mike Wolf maintained his eccentric in the midst of Frank's fight with substance abuse. By 2020, following Frank's departure within the scope of American Pickers, Mike discreetly helped him enroll in a rehabilitation center facility. "I couldn't just sit back and observe. Frank ends his own life, being my brother," a quiver in Mike's voice as he spoke. Rehabilitation, however, wasn't an emergency solution. Frank had a relapse. Several times, with increasingly powerful doses, which undermined his delicate form. Investments in multiple rehabilitation sessions, and hundreds of dollars were spent on medical care, several $100,000, what Frank had amassed financially throughout his glorious days. Dependency didn't merely endanger Frank's well-being. Moreover, undermined his reputation in the eyes of the people. The admirers who used to respect his innate wisdom, and an exhausted man started to feel passionate about shackled by medicinal tablets. I object to individuals in this way, Frank has previously expressed, confided in Chris over a restless night when he overcame desires. Still, through suffering, kindness was always there in Frank's heart. It was persisted in covertly supporting neighborhood organizations that help people, particularly those who are struggling with addiction software, as though attempting to make upon his own. The passing of Frank Fritz was not just a life coming to a close. It was the first spark in a heated argument about his family history. Hundreds of his antiques with rusty signs, old motorbikes, as well as unique pieces of Americana, was Auric, cultural resource. Through his store, Frank discovered at Savannah, Illinois, by Fritz once the beating core of his desire, now confronted the risk of being peddled in rush to split the inheritance. Dear Jerry, an additional trusted associate of Frank's, suggested, holding a large-scale auction to allocate the assortment to individuals who genuinely was grateful for it. Frank would prefer with his items to be resold to those who will be loved, Jerry added with a hint of emotion. But Frank left behind more than just his old things. He failed to address a critical question. With $6 million, what kind of run? The estate? Although a few of my own prompted to establish a core group to keep Frank's name alive, they said to address individual issues, it needs to be divided, owing money. This discussion didn't merely rip apart the household unit. Supporters were worried about what became of all that Frank had created. Throughout his life, Frank was on the lookout for what no one recalled. It is now his lasting impact that could be lost in time. One of the fans took to social media, causing many reactions based on emotions. But ultimately Frank Fritz is, for reasons other than financial gain or controversy, he has a generous spirit and relentless ardor. He began his journey towards amicable settlement with Mike Wolf. About his dying moments are a monument to the influence of a friend, nestled in a serene healthcare facility room, where Frank lay still but not yet. While holding his hand, Mike grinned and uttered, "You have been my best brother from the beginning." The time, which was very emotional, and candor healed past hurts and created a lovely recollection for anyone blessed with thestory. Following Frank Fritz's death on September 30th, 2024, he did more than merely succumb to old age. He departed, in the wake of an unfillable hole for everyone who liked American pickers and treasured his kind spirit. Hey there, Frank. I'm an flawed individual who fought opioid terrible diseases, addiction and condition, narrowing of the aortic valve, and a free spirit despite living with Crohn's disease who passionately pursued his calling, the explorer in search of long-lost riches. His life's work startled many, and not simply due of the controversy within his family over his $6 million estate and enigmatic bequest. However, due to it was brimming with horrifically human anxiousness, melancholy, and the delicate grace of existence. Frank, however, Fritz made an impression that extended well beyond goods from his beautiful business, Frank, or antiquities. It was taught us a valuable lesson in persistence, power of letting go, and how crucial it is to refusing to stray from own person. Heroism was never Frank's strong suit. He battled both mental and physical misery caused by 2019's botched back surgery to years of substance abuse simply to obtain all day long. That year, 2022, a stroke turned the man away from his autonomy, who wandered the United States into a patient who relied on medical devices. Still, not even Frank, even in the depths of despair, never lost the blaze he created. Even now, whenever he discussing classic bikes, it was continued to fantasize about unrealized wealth pursues prey. The impact of that resolve, he was approached by an Iowa fire safety inspector, becoming a cherished television personality, who served as an inspiration, 22 years of American collectors of goods. Frank has left more than just stored in his heirloom inventory, or at his Savannah, Illinois, shop. Itricides within his selfless soul. Regardless of fighting off disease and addiction, he subtly backed groups that were assisting some people are able to overcome their addiction, as a means of making amends for his personal battles. It was additionally documented a heartwarming tale of connection with Mike Wolf, his sibling, his mentor since their freshman year of high school, removed as a result of celebrity and wealth. In the dying moments of Frank, Mike clutched his discreetly murmured expressions of regret and affection. You were the most valuable asset I ever discovered," Mike said as he began to cry. His face. That was more than our reconciliation. The fact that no matter how bad things become at the end of the day, even the most profound wounds, the passing of Frank prompts inquiries that are still pending. Does he intend to sell his antiques, endure the rigors of the legal system, or perish? Withstanding the differences, will his family be able to inspired by a family's wealth? Above all else, though, Frank's narrative reveals an essential reality about being human. The true value of an individual does not reside in fame, fortune, or both, but rather in the way they actually live their lives, love, and get back up after you fall. Hello, Frank remained true to his heart despite the consequence, his well-being and broken bones interpersonal connections. In his words, "Life, however brief and troubled, is a cause worth championing when we are convinced in some context." It was more than just our renowned television host. He personified strength and perseverance, empathy, as well as the influential forgiveness. Because of him, from old dusty artifacts to the narrative of several pounding heart that remain steadfast, still motivate everyone who has the guts to try to love truly, to live one's life honestly, and to let go of grudges, albeit life can be so merciless at times. With each and every one of them, among the many stories that Frank has ever shared, there is one about hope. A lesson was learned at every turn, in the meaning of life itself.